Opened the show with a record from around, I bought that single around Thanksgiving time of 1964, Dave Clark 5, any way you want it. And I felt like I had taken a leap. I've talked about this before, records that make you feel like you're exploring something new. Now that could happen when you hear a folk record, when you're listening on a little bit of a different level, something a bit more cerebral, maybe your first Bob Dylan, that kind of a thing. But in this case, it was all the echo and the reverb, and it was a good stomping rave record. And I had just turned 8 years old, and I said, wow, man, I felt like I bought a rock and roll record that mattered. And before we get to the phones and all, I want to stay on the subject of the Dave Clark 5 for a moment and jump up 1 year from the autumn of 64 with that one to the autumn of 65, when they had a very big hit with a cover version of a tune from the late 50s that Bobby Day did on the B-side of his Rockin' Robin single, thing called Over and Over. Here's what I want you to listen to, okay? Because part of the magic here is hearing a song that you've heard 65,000 times, but listening with a different set of ears and maybe noticing something different. This happened to me this week. I heard Over and Over on 60s Gold, and I turned it up. It caught my attention. I said, wait a second. And I realized something. Now, when a drummer drums, they generally use a good chunk of their drum set, their drum kit. And they'll do some fills, and they'll hit the tom-tom and come back to the snare, or they'll go around the kit and go snare, tom, floor, tom-tom. You know what I mean? And of course, they hit their cymbals, or they'll keep beat 2 and 4 beat, on their hi-hat. You know what I'm talking about, right? The drummer uses, the full arsenal of percussion devices that they have, all their drums. I want you to listen to this record. The drummer on this record is a guy named Bobby Graham, a world-class session drummer in London. And he uses the bass drum, the kick drum, to keep, just a general beat, just a boom, boom, boom. But with his hands, he only uses the snare drum. As I listened, I said, he never goes near a cymbal. He doesn't go near a tom-tom. He just uses the snare. He does little fills and little crackles and slips and slops, and it's great. But it's just his 2 hands and the snare. He never goes near any other drum. And I'd never noticed that over these decades until this week, and I wanted to share that with you. So listen carefully to this record. Listen to what's not happening. He's not going around the kit until, by the way, the very, very, very end of the record. He does a little signature thing and goes, "Good-dum." And when he goes, "Good-dum," then he uses around the jump, and he hits the cymbal at the same time. It's sort of a way of saying, I didn't need this stuff, but okay, I'll say goodbye. So let's just listen to the drums and the great Bobby Graham, DC5, great vocal by Mike Smith, terrific 45. I think they're only #1 here in America, and their cover version of Over and Over. You're listening here. See if I'm right. Snare only. All right, Tom, let's do Dave Clark 5, 60s Gold. Am I right? Did you listen carefully? Am I right? Tom, were you listening? He was only hitting the snare drum, right?
Yeah, the
pretty cool. Well, but till the very end, he gives a little, and you know what? I mean, that's a decision that he as a drummer made when he was presented with that session. He says, I'm going to do this. I'm going to keep this real straight, forward. And the other thing that Bobby had to always remember was that it was Dave Clark who had to perform this stuff on TV shows and in concert. So we had to do things that Dave would be able to emulate. He couldn't get too crazy and start going all Keith Moon on the thing, So he kept it, but it's so effective. But it just hit me this week.